When I woke up in that hospital bed, the first thing I felt was pain. Not the sharp kind that makes you cry out. It was the quiet kind. The kind that sinks deep into your bones and settles there, like it plans to stay for a long time. It felt old. Heavy. Like my body had aged 10 years while I was asleep. I opened my eyes slowly, afraid that if I moved too fast, the world might slip away again. Above me was a ceiling so white it almost hurt to look at. There were small cracks running through it, thin and uneven like wrinkles on an old face. I remember thinking how strange it was that even ceilings grow tired with time. The lights above hummed softly, not loud enough to be annoying, but not quiet enough to forget. It was a tired sound, a sound that matched how I felt inside. I tried to lift my hand. Just a little. Just enough to know I was still here. But even that felt like lifting a sack of wet soil. My fingers trembled, then fell back onto the bed. The sheet felt rough against my skin, stiff with hospital starch. It smelled like medicine and something cold and clean that didn't belong to me. Nothing in that room felt like home. For a moment, I didn't know where I was. Hospitals do that to you. They steal your sense of time and place, and leave you floating somewhere between yesterday and tomorrow. Then the pain reminded me. A nurse noticed my eyes open and came closer. Her shoes made soft sounds against the floor. She smiled, the kind of smile people practice for moments like this. Gentle, careful, like she didn't want to break me. She asked how I was feeling. I wanted to say, I'm fine. That's what I've always said. That's what women like me are taught to say, no matter how much it hurts. But when I opened my mouth, my throat felt dry like I'd swallowed dust. My voice came out weak, thin, almost embarrassed to be heard. So instead of lying, instead of explaining, I just nodded. One small nod. It felt easier than finding the right words. The nurse adjusted something beside me, checked a monitor, then told me to rest. Her voice faded as she walked away, and once again, it was just me and the humming lights. That was the moment I should have been thinking about myself, about healing, about breathing, about getting strong again. But I was. Because even then, even through the pain and the fog and the weakness, something inside me felt wrong. At that moment, I didn't know that while I lay there, broken, stitched, and breathing through pain, my own son was trying to sell my farm. I didn't know that people were walking my land, pointing at fences, talking about value and price. I didn't know that papers were being shuffled across tables, that pens were scratching my future into ink. I didn't know that my name was being spoken in rooms I had never stepped into, by voices that didn't care if my heart was still beating. I didn't know any of that yet. All I knew was that my chest felt tight, in a way the doctors couldn't explain. The farm. That land was not just dirt and grass. It was the place where my hands learned what hard work really meant. The place where my knees bent into the soil, season after season. The place where my husband's laughter once echoed across the fields before sickness took it away. We built a life there with our bare hands. No shortcuts, no help, just faith and stubbornness and love. That soil had felt our tears, our sweat, our prayers whispered into the wind when no one else was listening. Even after my husband was gone, I could still feel him there, in the creak of the porch boards, in the way the trees leaned when the storms came. That land remembered us. And I believed, foolishly maybe, that my son remembered too. But lying there in that hospital bed, I didn't know any of that was being taken from me. I didn't know my home was already being discussed like a thing. Like something that could be passed from hand to hand without feeling. What I did know was this strange, quiet fear. Not fear in my body. Not fear of dying. It was deeper than that. It was the kind of fear you feel when your spirit senses danger before your mind understands it. When something precious is slipping away and you don't... I grew up poor, but not the kind of poor people speak about later with a soft smile and a lesson learned. It was the real kind of poor, the kind that settles into your bones early and teaches you things before you are ready to understand them. My shoes were patched so many times that the leather looked like a quilt, each stitch holding on a little longer than it should. Meals were never certain, and when they came They were stretched with patience and quiet hope. You learned not to complain, because complaining did not fill an empty plate. You learned to be grateful for what was there and silent about what was missing. When I married my husband, I did not marry into comfort or security. I married into work. We had no money saved, no land passed down, no promises of an easy future. All we had were young bodies, strong backs, and a belief that if we worked hard enough, something good would eventually grow from it. The farm we found was not beautiful. It was wild land, overgrown and stubborn, like it had been waiting to test whoever dared to claim it. The soil was hard, the fences broken, and the fields uneven. But when my husband looked at it, he didn't see what it was. He saw what it could become, and somehow, standing there beside him, I did too. We cleared that land together, day after day, season after season. Every stone was lifted by hand, our fingers raw and aching by evening. Every fence post was hammered into the ground with effort and sweat, our clothes stained with dirt that never fully washed out. We planted seeds not knowing if the rain would come or if the harvest would fail, but believing, always believing, that tomorrow could be better than today. There were days when our bodies were so tired we barely spoke, and nights when we fell asleep without finishing our meals. But there was joy in that tiredness. There was pride in seeing the land slowly change under our care, like it was learning to trust us. Our son was born in that small farmhouse, during a night when the wind rattled the windows so hard I thought the glass might shatter. The air smelled of fresh earth and rain, and the walls were thin enough that the sounds of the outside world came in with us. I remember holding him close, his tiny body warm against mine, while my husband stood nearby, his eyes full in a way I had never seen before. That house was not big. It was not fancy. But in that moment, it felt like the richest place on earth. That land raised our son as much as we did. It fed him, even in years when money was scarce. It taught him patience through long seasons of waiting, and responsibility through chores that had to be done whether he felt like it or not. He learned the value of effort by watching crops grow slowly, not instantly. He learned respect by seeing how the land responded to care and punished neglect. That farm was his playground, his classroom, his shelter. Every memory of his childhood is tied to that soil, even if he doesn't remember it that way anymore. When my husband passed, the world went quiet in a way I didn't know was possible. The farm changed after that, not because the land was different, but because I was. The mornings felt heavier and the evenings longer, but I still got up every day because the farm gave me a reason to. It needed me, and I needed it just as much. I talked to the trees like they were old friends who understood my loss. I told them things I couldn't say out loud. I sat on the porch in the evenings, watching the light fade, remembering the laughter that once filled the yard and echoing footsteps that would never return. My son grew older. He built a life away from the land. He married, found work in the city, and learned a different way of living. The visits home became fewer, the stays shorter. Each time he left, it felt a little easier for him and a little harder for me. The farm remained the same, steady and patient, but the distance between us grew like an unspoken truth neither of us wanted to face. When he did come back, his words were different. He talked about money, about expenses, about how difficult life had become. He spoke of the farm like it was a burden, like it was something heavy I was dragging behind me instead of something holding me upright. He said it was too much work for an old woman, his voice full of concern that sounded like care, but felt like something else. He looked at the fields with unfamiliar eyes, seeing value only in numbers. The first time my son mentioned selling the farm, I laughed. It wasn't a loud laugh or a mocking one. It was the kind of soft laugh that comes from disbelief, the kind you give when someone says something so impossible that your mind refuses to accept it. I truly thought he was joking, speaking without thinking, the way people sometimes do when they are tired or frustrated. I looked at him across the kitchen table, his coffee growing cold in his hands, and I smiled like the thought had never crossed my mind before. "This land will die with me," I said softly, not to challenge him, not to provoke him, but simply to state a truth I had lived with for years. To me, it was as natural as saying the sun would rise in the morning. The farm was not something I planned to leave behind or trade away. It was the last place my husband and I still existed together. It was my anchor, my memory, my purpose. I expected my son to laugh too, to shake his head, and say he hadn't meant it seriously. But he didn't laugh back. He just sat there, quiet, his eyes moving around the room like he was measuring it, like he was already imagining it empty. That silence stayed with me long after he left. It crept into my thoughts at night when the house was quiet and the wind moved through the trees outside. It was the first time I felt something shift between us, something small but sharp, like the beginning of a crack in glass. After that, his visits felt different. They were shorter, like he had somewhere else he needed to be, somewhere more important. He didn't linger the way he used to. He didn't walk the fields with me or sit on the porch in the evenings. His voice carried less warmth, his hugs felt rushed, and his eyes rarely met mine for long. The house felt colder when he was there, even on warm days, and quieter when he left. Then he started bringing papers with him. He always said they were just something to look at, nothing serious, nothing final. He spread them across the table where I used to knead dough and sort seeds. He talked about buyers who were just asking, and people who were interested, that's all. He spoke in careful words, like he was trying not to alarm me, but every sentence felt like it was pushing the farm further away from me and closer to something I didn't recognize. I told him I wasn't ready. I told him that the land still needed me, and I still needed it. I told him I was strong, stronger than he thought, stronger than I looked. I reminded him that I had worked this land longer than he had been alive, that my hands knew it better than any paper ever could. He nodded when I spoke, but his nods felt empty, like politeness instead of understanding. Each conversation left me more tired than the last. Not physically, but in my heart. There is a special kind of exhaustion that comes from feeling unheard, from realizing that someone you love is no longer listening. I began to notice small things, things I had ignored before. The way he checked his phone while I talked. The way he sighed when I spoke about the farm's history instead of its value. The way his patience wore thin when I held onto the past. Then came the illness. It arrived without warning, on a morning that started like any other. I was standing in the kitchen when my chest suddenly burned, like fire spreading through me from the inside. It stole my breath and made the room spin. I tried to hold onto the counter, but my legs gave out beneath me. The floor rushed up, and the world went dark, quiet in a way that felt final. When I woke up again, time had slipped away from me. I was in a hospital bed, surrounded by unfamiliar sounds and sterile smells. Days had passed, though I didn't know how many. My head felt heavy, my body weak, like I had been emptied. It wasn't my son who told me the truth. That is the part that still hurts the most. It was a lawyer. He came into my hospital room one afternoon when the light outside was already turning soft and gray. I remember watching the shadows move slowly across the wall as the sun lowered itself, like it was tired of watching what was happening to me. The man knocked gently before entering, even though the door was already open. He wore a neat suit that looked out of place in that quiet room, like he belonged to a different world entirely. He was polite, almost too polite. His voice was soft, measured, careful, the way people speak when they know they are carrying something heavy but don't want to drop it too suddenly. He introduced himself and explained that he was there to clarify a few matters. The words sounded harmless enough, but my chest tightened as soon as he said them. Something inside me knew that whatever he was about to say was not meant to bring comfort. He asked if I was aware that my property was being transferred. For a moment, I thought I had misunderstood him. My ears rang slightly, and I wondered if the medication was making me hear things wrong. I looked at his face, searching for a sign that this was some kind of mistake, some confusion that would be easily cleared up. I laughed. It was a strange laugh, shaky and hollow, the kind that slips out when your mind refuses to accept what it's being told. I laughed because the idea was so impossible, so far removed from what I believed my life still was. I laughed because surely no one could be talking about my farm without me knowing. Surely no one would make such a decision while I lay there unable to even sit up on my own. Then the laughter stopped, and I cried. The tears came fast and hot, spilling down my face before I could stop them. I felt foolish crying in front of a stranger, but the pain was too sharp to hide. I told him, through broken breaths, that I had never signed anything, that I had never agreed to any sale, that no one had the right to do this in my name. The lawyer's expression changed then, just slightly. His eyes shifted, his mouth tightened, and he stopped speaking altogether. He went quiet. That silence told me everything. In that moment, I understood more than any explanation could have given me. The truth settled over me slowly, like dust after something precious has shattered. My son thought I wouldn't wake up, or that if I did, I wouldn't be strong enough to fight. Or maybe he believed I wouldn't understand what was happening, that my age had softened my mind along with my body. He believed I was already gone, even while I was still breathing. I closed my eyes and felt something inside me change. It wasn't anger at first. It was grief. A deep, aching grief for the boy I thought I had raised and the man standing in his place. I replayed every conversation in my head, every smile I had offered when something felt wrong, every moment I had chosen silence over truth. I realized then that my quiet had been mistaken for weakness. But he forgot something very important. That farm was not just protected by fences and soil and years of labor. When I returned home, the farm greeted me like an old friend who had been waiting patiently for my return. The road leading up to the house felt familiar beneath the tires, every curve and bump known by heart. As I stepped out of the car, the air wrapped around me in a way no hospital room ever could. It carried the scent of soil, grass, and something older, something steady. The wind moved through the fields gently, brushing the tops of the crops like a hand laid softly on a shoulder, as if the land itself was saying, "Welcome back." I stood there for a long moment, letting my eyes travel across the fields. They were still there. The fence lines, slightly uneven but standing. The old oak in the distance, its branches stretched wide like arms that had never stopped waiting. My body was weaker than before, my steps slower, but my heart felt fuller just being there. I felt something inside me settle, like a piece of myself had finally come home. My son didn't come with me. I noticed his absence immediately, not because I was looking for him, but because part of me had expected him to be there, standing awkwardly, maybe unsure of what to say. But the yard was quiet. No car in the drive, no footsteps behind me, just the sound of the wind and the distant call of birds. For the first time, I didn't feel the urge to explain anything to him. I didn't feel the need to soften the truth or hide my hurt behind a smile. And I didn't chase him. There was a time when I would have. A time when I would have called, begged, tried to fix what was breaking between us with gentle words and patience. But some lessons do not need shouting or tears or endless explanations. Some lessons need distance. They need silence strong enough to be felt. I realized that loving someone does not always mean running after them. Sometimes it means standing still and letting them see what they've walked away from. The sale was stopped. The papers were reversed quietly, firmly, without drama. The land returned fully to me, not just on paper, but in spirit. Nothing had truly changed, and yet everything had. The farm remained, still breathing, still alive, still rooted in the life we had built here. It had endured my absence, my illness, and even betrayal, and it had not given up on me. In that way, it felt more loyal than blood. Now I sit on the porch most evenings, the same place I've sat for years. The boards creak beneath my weight, and the chair rocks a little slower than it used to. I feel older, yes. My hands ache more, my body tires faster. But there is a strength in me now that I didn't have before. A strength my son never understood because it doesn't shout and it doesn't rush. It waits. It endures. It stands firm when everything else tries to move it. I watch the sun dip low over the fields and think about all that has passed. About love given freely. About trust tested. About silence mistaken